On the Gary Bisbee Show, here are practical lessons from today's healthcare insiders. We'll uncover stories about their challenges, paths to success, and the skills that they've developed, as together we'll explore how the healthcare economy is transforming. How will health policy change when over 30% of Americans believe that the healthcare system is not meeting their needs? Bill McInturff has been a political pollster and a political strategist for 30 years. He has an amazing time series of data in how the public views healthcare, which he shares with us in this conversation. Bill has a succinct formula for assessing where companies fit in healthcare, under the care umbrella or financing umbrella. How does the public view these two umbrellas? Where does consumer experience fit? What is the steady state of the public's perception of hospitals and health insurers? We cover these topics and more. Bill has been the longtime pollster for the NBC Wall Street Journal poll, and he provides an insider's view of how the topics are selected and the results are covered. Bill is an engaging storyteller with deep knowledge of healthcare politics, which we will explore in this conversation. Well, good afternoon, Bill, and welcome.
Well, thank you, Gary. I appreciate it.
We're pleased to have you at this microphone. Why don't we kick off and learn a little bit more about you? What was your life like growing up, Bill?
Well, I have to give my parents credit. It was not that tough. I was raised in affluent suburban Chicago and in suburban Boston. So my parents worked very hard. My classic baby boomer. My dad went to college on the GI loan and changed his life. And of course, we had a very different life as a consequence.
For sure. So what suburb in Chicago?
We lived in Glen Ellen and Deerfield. We lived in Wayland in Massachusetts. Probably in terms of a little bit different, I didn't really go to college full time. I sold Fuller Brush at 17 and 19 years old. It was an old household and hairbrush product. Then I went to work for a family business, went to school part-time while working for a family business, took the family business over in my early 20s, and then took a year off to travel through Europe and the Mideast. I lived in an Israeli moshav, cutting peppers and picking flowers, and then came back in my middle 20s and started my career in politics, working for the very first George Bush for president campaign in 1979. So that's that sort of not go to school, work instead, little different than the rest of my peers.
Yeah, but that makes it more interesting. So what came first, your interest in politics, in polling, in campaigning?
Oh, no, it was definitely in politics and in campaigns. When I was in 8th grade, when we were doing our kind of American civics, I went to the teacher and said, well, how do you become a campaign manager? I want to run campaigns. My mother was a devoted American history buff. She was an American exceptionalist. She was active and very committed to politics. And of course, the mid 60s were tumultuous. And so what I wanted to do was, from the earliest age, was to move to Washington, D.C. and run campaigns for a living. So I am one of those very lucky people who got to do their live stream.
At what point did you realize you could actually make a life out of political polling?
My poor parents. Politics is not for the faint of heart. You know, I worked for the Bush campaign and then he lost. Then I ran a congressional campaign, then he lost. Then I did some work in a congressional races. And then you lose your job at the end of the cycle. And by this time, you're 30 years old and your parents say, oh my gosh, your friends are lawyers, they're doctors, they have careers, they're getting married. You can't even keep a job. So it's hard. That's just part of being in politics. But you've got to be prepared for that. But what I told my parents was, look, if you hang on, if you survive the first 5 years, you get 10 years. And if you survive 10 years, no one I can see in politics has ever gone broke. But it's a learning curve and it's not a stable way to make a living. But the other thing that's true is my firm has been very successful. God bless America. But all of myself and my partners never thought we would earn this kind of money. No one ever starts running campaigns because what you want to do is to make money. If you want to make money, you go to New York City, you work in finance, you become a lawyer, there's a lot of ways to make a good living in America. Campaigns and politics are not it.
Like a lot of baby boomers, many of us have ended up earning a lot more than we ever thought we would, I think. And it is a great country. Bill, as I think about polling and the kind of data you collect and advice you provide, some people like to develop data and advise others. Some people like to just make decisions. Have you ever thought about kind of where you fit on that spectrum?
One of the differences between our partnership and our experience compared to a lot of other pollsters, I spent the first 6 or 8 years of my career working for the national party committees, running campaigns. My partners did. Most of our partners have experience as practitioners before becoming pollsters. So compared to a lot of other firms, we have an enormous amount of ability to look at numbers, then talk about how tactically to execute the numbers. And we have a lot of understanding about the mechanics of how to deliver messaging as a function of that background. And of course, what I tell people is, look, when you hire a pollster, the most important thing about polling is the numbers have to be right. And importantly, there's got to be confidence, meaning that people in the team have to believe the numbers are right, because it has to be the common ground to which to make decisions. And beyond that, if we can, as we do, try to contribute based on that experience of translating polling to action, that's a value added. But fundamentally, the most important thing is the people in the campaign or in your clients believe the number and willing to use it as a common set point. But for me personally, the thing I like the most or enjoy the most we have something called partials, meaning you write these questionnaires, you write a bunch of questions you've never done before. I don't know for sure how voters and adults are going to respond. And so my most fun is the first day of partials, where after doing all this work to draft a questionnaire, you see how it works. You see how people respond to those questions. And of course, again, what I'm very good at actually is you get the partial data and then things do not work. And then we have to rewrite the questions, because during the survey, we rewrite the questions 2 times, 3 times to try to find a positioning that we can demonstrate works better. And taking the partials is A, I love it, it's fun, but B, reworking those partials so that our client interest is advanced during the survey is probably the most satisfying and thing I like, because clients love it. You say, here's day 1, you're losing by 20. We rewrote it. Here's day 2, our position is losing by 12. And here's day 3, we broke even. And break even may not sound like a quote win, but if you're down 20 with the first set of language and you're breaking even by the end with the third rewrite, something good's going on, and you're learning a ton about how to communicate your client position.
Well, how many times when you're starting the partials, how many times are you surprised at the results at that point?
Fairly often. This is the other thing I tell people. We know a lot about American public opinion, but we ask questions all the time we've never asked before. And I'm pretty good at estimating the American public, but I'm not being hired because someone says to me, Bill, what do you think people will think? They're hiring me to go interview hundreds or thousands of people to go find out for sure. And it would be hubris for me to say, I know for sure what Americans are going to think. That's hubris. And so we're pretty good, but we have a good humility to make sure that that's our job. We're listening to public opinion, not trying to say that we can predict or know what it's going to be.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Let's go back to public opinion strategies. So why did you decide to found the company?
We had the great good fortune of working for a guy named Richard Worthman, who was President Reagan's pollster. Richard was a gentleman, a very talented pollster, and we were very fortunate to be there. But like in every business, my partners and I were a third of the business, and we were offered about 5% of equity. And we're pollsters. And as I said to my partners, hey, 100% of a whole chunk is bigger than 5% of the whole company. This is not a fair deal. We tried to negotiate to offer to a joint venture, and we tried some other things given our regard and respect. That was something the Richard did not want to pursue. And so we ended up, and by the way, and he said to us, look, the best decision, the happiest you're ever going to be is the fact we didn't sign this deal, because you guys are going to do great and I wish you well. We were approaching 40 and having children. And at some point, it's a very practical consideration. And of course, the other difference was we felt these were our clients. Of course, they were attracted. Richard Worthland is a very talented guy, but we felt, hey, they're our clients. They're going to come with us. And 100% of them did. And I think, we had a different perception of the value of the Worthland name. And so we started, and we started in 1991. We did pretty well in 1992. And then in 1994 was the Newt Gingrich revolution. There were 93 members, new Republican members. Republicans won the House for the first time in 50 years. And our firm did 27 of those 93 new members of the House. And so sort of overnight, there became a Republican majority. People wanted to have Republican pollsters. And our client base went from good, we had about 10 or 12 members, to 40. And we represented about 25% to 25% of the entire US House. And that's, again, that experience of, because again, soon to be Speaker Gingrich used to meet with the national pollsters. It was a coordinated effort, and being a very small one part of that effort, and then being part of getting a Republican majority, it was an incredibly exciting time. But it also was a time that rebuilt our firm and kind of put us on the trajectory that we've been enjoying ever since.
Let me go back to the very beginning, Bill, of founding of POS, approaching 40, having children. What did you think about the risk of starting up a new venture?
Actually, again, the story many do not know. The first person to know that my wife was pregnant was not her mother or my mother or family. It was my soon-to-be business partner. Because when he said, hey, this is easy for you. You don't have any kids. Your wife works. I leveraged her pregnancy and said, no one knows yet, but she's pregnant. I'm in the same situation. Look, I made a promise to each of the spouses, and my promise was that we would not finance the business by mortgaging our homes, and that we would pay off all loans. Their homes would be safe. We went out and raised capital. I have to be honest, we thought it was a good deal, but we ended up raising money from just our family and friends. No actual investors put in money. They thought it was too risky. And then most importantly, what they thought, if you're an actual investor, they said, look, you guys will do really well, but this isn't real money. Real money is when you're going to go sell a company and I'm going to make, 3 or 4 times the amount. My parents and my partner's parents and our best friends put in the money. And then we gave them too good a deal. And then we bought them out within the first 4 or 5 years. And they did remarkably well. But we wanted to own the 100% of the business. But yeah, look, this is scary. We raised, we were deep in the hole in the first 6 months, and you have to have the confidence that the business was going to be there in an election year. But those are scary times. And that's part of creating a business.
Well, you talk about political polling, which sounds like the core of the business, but I know you also work for trade groups and associations and so on. How do they use data, polling data?
Well, actually now, Public Opinion Strategies is a very different firm. About half of our work is our core political business, and half is in public policy. And that half, and most of that half, is in healthcare. All of these things happened by accident. It was May of 1991. I had just started my business, literally just started my business. It was like 10 days old. One of our investors was a healthcare policy expert. There was a major healthcare meeting coming up. She asked me to talk about public opinion in healthcare. I said, well, I don't know anything about healthcare. And she said, well, you know a lot about campaigns. Talk about what's going to happen. And so in May of 1991, what I said was, I went to this meeting and I said out loud, hey, look, you got to understand, there's the Harris-Wofford special election in Pennsylvania is being run on the issue of healthcare. I just did a campaign in 1990 where a safe Republican incumbent ended up being in a tight race because the Democrat was running on a single payer system. This healthcare issue is going to be a big deal. And by the way, people like their doctor. We have Marcus Welby, MD. We don't have Insurance Agent Jones TV shows. And the insurance industry, the health insurance industry is going to get stuck. They're going to be the bad fall guy for this. And we're in the midst of a major revolution about how we deliver healthcare that's going to upend the political process. So in that audience that day was the head of the Health Insurance Association of America. And he called me and said, we'd like to hire you. And I said, well, I don't know anything about healthcare. He said, well, we know a lot about healthcare, but we're getting crushed. So we'll teach you about healthcare, but what are we supposed to say and how we defend this industry? And of course, what happened is Harris-Wofford ended up beating a former Republican governor in Pennsylvania. The consultants to that were Jim Carville and Paul Begala. They went on to run Clinton's campaign in '92, all about healthcare. And then I ended up working for the Health Insurance Association. We ended up in September of 1993, where President Clinton introduced Clinton Care and his kind of card he held up saying, this will be all you need to get healthcare in America. We did the work for the Health Insurance Association that became the Harry and Louise campaign, which was there were two, Harry, the husband, and Louise, who was the wife, kind of at their kitchen table worrying about their bills, saying there's got to be a better way. Now, by today's standards, those ads were pretty tame, but at the time, it was a big deal. No one had ever run a national TV campaign before on a public policy issue. And the other big deal was that Washington, D.C. worked on the presumption that Danny Rostenkowski, the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, was going to sit in a room with all the same players, all the same interests, and make a deal. And that if you were the skunk in the party, meaning the health insurance industry, if you went and you kind of went outside that process, you were going to get stiffed. So inside the health insurance industry, actually, the five major companies left the association because that's their worldview. I met with one or two of the people and said, you're totally missing the mark. That's not what's going to happen. You are much safer doing this. And then look, I think the campaign had impact, but the Democrats allowed it to collapse. There was no single vote in the Ways and Means Committee, no single vote in the House floor. All of Clinton Kerr collapsed. And then, of course, it led into, at the same time, our political work where, as I mentioned, we ended up, helping elect 27 of the 93 new members of Congress. So what it meant was, heading into 1995, our firm was the folks who did Clinton Care and worked against Clinton Care for Harry and Louise. We were the folks that had all these new members, and we had a substantial, and then we started getting hired by a lot of other healthcare interests because they wanted to talk to a new Republican majority about healthcare. And we had learned a lot about the issue, and we have a debt of gratitude to the people inside HIA who taught me a lot both about healthcare polling, healthcare issue, and but that confluence between our Harry and Louise campaign and the '94 campaign is what essentially created the foundation for our business.
Well, so going back to 1991, 20 years ago, how do you view the evolution of the attitudes of our population toward healthcare?
Over this 30-year horizon, 30-year horizon, there are sort of waves in terms of American public opinion. I think when you look at the waves, the one thing I see over time is we have this very deceptively simple question, which is the healthcare system meeting the needs of you and your family? When over 30% of Americans start saying, no, it doesn't, it's not meeting my needs. We've had major healthcare battles in this country, HMO in the late 90s, and then some of the, Obama and the efforts to expand coverage. They've all been around a point at which more than 30% say the healthcare system doesn't meet my needs. And then the other thing I've seen happen over time is people say, yep, I want a government solution. I want more government. Government's got to be involved here. And then there's this effort to involve more government. And as soon as government gets involved, support for it drops. I've seen that happen in the early 90s, mid 90s, around Obamacare. And who knows, we might be watching, we'll see if it happens during the Biden administration. I think the third thing that you see is, frankly, like hospitals. Hospitals are a public-facing consumer product. And the thing that's been true during this time period is they have high public esteem, and that it's higher now post-COVID-19. But for all the challenges the hospitals had for public policy, they always have great numbers because for the most part, most of us go to a hospital and they are, great things happen. During this time period, the entities I say in healthcare, there's two umbrellas. Are you under the money umbrella or are you under the care umbrella? If you're under the care umbrella, you're set. And that care umbrella are doctors, nurses, and other parts of our healthcare system. If you're under the money umbrella, which tends to be the health insurance folks, you've got troubles. Hospitals are a little bit of both. And then the other thing that has happened over time is the pharmaceutical industry has had its ups and downs over these 30 years. And again, deservedly, they're getting the best press, best reaction, best numbers they've gotten in a long, long, long time. As the American public recognizes, you might be frustrated with the vaccines administration, but hey, we've got vaccines. We've got 2 of them, soon to be 3. That happened incredibly quickly because of an incredibly competent industry. And it's been a reminder for millions of people who are saying, oh yeah, well, I grumble about prices, I grumble about this, but yeah, they create miracles that save lives. And so the pharmaceutical industry's had a tick up that is, more than a tick up in 2020, and all accelerating as a function of what they've helped us all do with these vaccines.
Let's go back to your formulation of some of the companies, organizations fit under the care umbrella, some fit under the financial umbrella. Hospitals are straddling the two to some degree. During COVID, really, for the last year, I think hospitals have increased in the public opinion, their view of them. Do you think that hospitals will kind of keep this public perception that they're really doing a great job, and will that be useful to them politically, I wonder?
Well, a few things. Yes, there'll be some sustained progress even post-COVID where those numbers will stay in place. Yes, hospitals are in an advantageous place, including their request for more money. We're also at a point where we've been working for hospitals a long time. The support for hospitals getting more money is at a high watermark over a 20-year period. But by the way, here's my point of that 30 years of experience. No, I don't think longer term, over some horizon, when I talk about these long waves over these 30 years, I don't know, but hospitals will sooner or later, they'll drop down to what has been a steady state over a 30-year period. The point I'm making is that steady state is still really attractive. That, as I said, for all the pressures hospitals are under, our meaning now is on behalf of the American public, our first reaction to a hospital is our consumer experience. And as I said, every day, 24/7, the consumer experience most Americans get in hospitals is extraordinarily positive. And as a consequence of that, hospitals have endured sort of public policy attacks in a good way because of the esteem in which that they're held because of that consumer experience.
So just a couple of questions on the mechanics of polling. You hear a lot about the fact that people now have cell phones, not landline phones. At least a lot more people have only cell phones. And I'm assuming that it's harder for you to survey them. How is that playing out, Bill, in terms of just the conduct of the polls?
Well, I think we're at a point where to be honest, these are challenges. And this is an industry that has substantial challenges because of the not just we can get people, it's the cooperation rate. It's people's willingness to do the surveys that has shifted and changed over time. So today, according to the CDC, which interesting note, it's the CDC that tracks cell phone use in America. Because they're in charge of the responsibility of public health, they're the ones that track how would you get a hold of people. So they tell us that 62.5% of the country has only a cell phone. We are very capable of contacting people on a cell phone. However, because of laws that were passed 20 years ago, you cannot automatically use a machine to dial that number. You've got to do it by hand. So the labor cost of calling people on cell phones is 2 to 4 times what it costs using an automated dialer, where you wait till someone picks up a phone or a landline. So polling's gotten very expensive. But as well today, again, 20, 30 years ago, there was one way to do polling that worked. It was by the phone. Today, we're in a world where there's phone polling. And again, we're very comfortable getting the right percent of cell phones. But in addition to that, we have internet panels. These are millions of people who sign up to take surveys online. We have some companies that created their own internet panels where they randomly collected and attracted people to the panel. We have river polling, where like SurveyMonkey does 2 or 3 million polls a day for all these little organizations. And then some chunk of them are asked, hey, would you stay on and do another poll? Also, we do now text to landline. We text cell saying, hey, we're texting you, would you go to our webpage and do the survey? Or we're emailing to web. So, and then there's something called IVR, where automatically you get this on your landline. There's been pre-recorded, you punch numbers. That's 8 different ways to collect data. And so as an industry, the industry is trying to compensate for this lack of cooperation by a range of methodologies that just didn't exist 20 or 30 years ago. And all of them are being stretched or strained a bit. And all of it's increasing the price. And so most of our clients, here's our clients. We have done work for the CDC. We've done work for HHS. Those are clients who I say, hey, guess what? They work for people who print the money. So if you work for people who print the money, then methodologically, they can afford stuff that no other private client can afford. Nobody would make those trade-offs and pay that kind of money in terms of a very pristine methodology. So I think we are, as an industry, I think we are doing a good job of trying to represent public opinion, but there's no question it's getting harder, and there's no one clear good answer for what is the best way to do this at this point.
There's been some criticism in the last couple of elections about the projections of a particular race. Is that a trend, or is this just an exception? How has that been coming about?
I think they're a little bit different. In the 2016 campaign nationally, the average polls over the last weekend said Hillary Clinton would win by 3.5 points. She won by 2.1. If in the midst of all that stuff going on, you're 1.5 points off, you're doing a pretty good job. I think it's more of an issue in 2020. The average poll said that Biden would win by 7 points. He won by 4.5. That's a bigger miss than we've seen in polling for years and years. And I'm really wrestling with, is this a Donald Trump phenomena, or is it these issues about cooperation rates and surveys, who we can reach? Because I'm torn, because the polling in 2018 was right on. The polling in the Georgia special election in 2021 was right on. Our work for all our initiative campaigns, we feel really good about. Our private work for our individual political clients, we feel really good about. There's one guy that has been a little bit of a problem, and that's how do you survey Donald Trump? And so as an industry, a few things. One, there's a national, everybody's got their own association. We have a National Association of Public Opinion Research. They did a post-analysis of 2016. They'll be doing one of 2020. That'll come out, I'm sure, this fall. And then internally, NBC Wall Street Journal, we're going to be doing our own post-analysis. It's frustrating for people because guess what we need? We need the voter files. In other words, you go to vote, and then your town or city or county know for sure you voted. They send it to your state, and then the state sends it, and then we collect it nationally. But we need to know who actually voted, so we can compare who we thought was going to vote to who really voted, to see if there's somebody we're missing, and if this was a demographic miss, or if, and this would be the not good part, we have the demographics right, but still, like, and let's pick me. I'm a now over 65 Republican guy who's a Republican primary voter, and I do the survey. The entire survey world is built on this premise. If I've talked to Bill McInturff, and he's over 65 and a Republican primary voter, and he's a man, and he's got this demographics, he lives in this neighborhood, he'll be a lot like his neighbor who's also 65, Republican primary voter, who we couldn't reach on the phone. And if there's evidence that we interviewed the right demographics, I still think there's still a miss, and it means that there's been a breakdown, where the Bill McInturff equivalent in the neighborhood who refused to do the survey is different than I am because I did the survey. And that's a challenge. That's the core challenge to our industry. And it's one that people have every right to ask of this industry. I think there will be an answer, but it's not, there's a reason we can't answer that on November 12th. It takes months of work to try to give everyone an answer. So feel free to contact me in the spring and fall, and we'll give you an update about what we've learned, how much work is being done to make sure what we do works better.
Well, we may come back for another interview, Bill. That'd be terrific. You mentioned the NBC Wall Street Journal poll, which you started back in 1995, the classic poll. What was behind your starting that poll? What was the thinking behind it?
I was not there for the start. There's a guy named Peter Hart from Hart Research Associates. He started the poll, but he started the poll with a different pollster named Bob Teeter, a different Republican pollster. Bob Teeter was doing the polling for George H.W. Bush. He was a very nationally well-known, famous Republican pollster. The start of this was that there was Peter and Bob represented the very best of the partisan pollsters, Republican or Democrat. And the feeling was, look, NBC Wall Street Journal, as opposed to you're hiring your own internal research department, you have at access now two different major research firms, both of these expertise. It's bipartisan, and it's from practitioners, people who are doing campaigns for a living that would distinguish the poll. So Bob and Peter started it with Tim Russert and Al Hunt. It was the poll has been very successful. It's been historically incredibly accurate. If you're sort of the people who do this for a living, I think that people who do this for a living do read the poll, because the question structure, and I think there are differences because we bring that kind of that sort of both partisan, but as well the practitioner point of view. Poor Bob Teeter unfortunately died, and I was hired as his replacement in 2004. So this has been 16 years. But it's a very powerful document because you have, again, 30 years of trend data. And as a consequence, if you've got that much trend data over time with the same kind of people doing it, what you learn about the major shift in American attitudes in this country, and your capacity to report it and have that reporting be part of how NBC and Wall Street Journal communicate to this country what's changing. All of that, I think, has been made, a really positive impact, and I think that's the way that both of those companies feel about that work.
So the time series feels like it would be very valuable. Do you specifically write on the time series, on the evolution over this 25 or 30 year period of time?
Well, we don't. I'm fortunate. I'm not a writer. I'm a talker. But this is why it helps to have NBC and Wall Street Journal. You've got two major news organizations, and again, you admire their capacity to take this information and translate it in their own medium. But for example, we know from social science research, we know it took. We did this work looking at shifts in social attitudes about gay marriage. So we went back and looked at, okay, how many years did it take for a majority of Americans to approve of interracial marriage? That was 57 years. How many years did it take to approve of this kind of change? Our attitudes about gay marriage changed in 12 years to be from a majority opposed to majority support. There's no precedent for a major social attitude to change like that. We're watching very different attitudes around Generation Z and millennials. They're going to be a very different generation. One other one that's of interest to me, in 2004, 42% of the country said they attended church or religious service once a week or more. 15% said they didn't attend any. In this last election, the lines crossed. More people said that they do not attend any religious service and say they attend weekly or more. All of that has political consequence. And also now we've also looked at how demographics shift in terms of how the party composition, who's a Republican or Democrat, who's a liberal or conservative. These are not fixed, and these are things that have shifted a lot. And understanding those changes and reporting those changes is a core part of what happens that makes, I think, this poll a little bit different in terms of its focus.
How are topics chosen or selected, Bill?
Well, we're also very fortunate because we're working with NBC and Wall Street Journal. So you're working with these really terrific news organizations. And so what happens is Chuck Todd, Mark Murray at NBC, Jerry Saad, Aaron Zitner at Wall Street Journal. We have something we call TIMs, which is memos from the client for what do you think it is we should cover. And so there's a nice combination, which is the clients say, look, here's what we see as the major stories this month. Here's what we're going to cover. A lot of times they have special editions coming up. They have special focuses. They want more data. So they provide their information. We provide our thoughts about what we're seeing. We draft a survey and then they go through it. And then there's this not easy process. The not easy process is to agree on language between our polling team on our side, the Hart polling team, and then agree on language with NBC and Wall Street Journal. So that's a lot of cooks. It takes a lot of patience. That's occasionally irritating for all involved, but all involved have a respect for each other and then a tolerance to understand that this process generally works, and it has created stronger, better questions because of a one-day battle for what words you use and what questions and how to do a question. That's, as I said, there's a tolerance for that process because of the regard and respect across that team.
Let's take the issue of partisanship if we could. I'm sure your data shows that partisanship has been increasing over time. What's your view of that, Bill? And is there a pathway out of this highly partisan time we're in?
Tolerance for longer answers, because this has been I call it partisan silos and our hardening partisan silos. First, you cannot blame Trump. Trump was the end of the process, not anywhere near the beginning of the process. Political scientists measure polarization based on how one party rates its own president compared to the other party. So Ronald Reagan was the most polarizing president in history until Bill Clinton. And then he was the most polarizing president in history until George W. Bush, and then Obama, and then finally Trump. And so through 30 years, this trend has been going on. And then in terms of power, how powerful is this trend in terms of straight ticket voting? In the 80s and 90s and even the 2000s, we had 150 to 200 congressional districts that would vote one way for president and a different way for House representatives. Today, right now, that's 16 seats. 16 seats. That's it. Out of 435 seats, we only have 16 that voted differently for president and the member of Congress. That's extraordinary. Now, what's causing that? What's causing that, I believe, are a few things. First, redistricting, because both parties have an incentive to try to create as many safe seats as possible. So we don't have swing seats. So members worry about their primaries, not the general election. And then two, the other extraordinary change is media access, social media, and how we get information. Most people now read only from a news source that fundamentally agrees with their position. And it reinforces your point of view. I have the great good fortune of being in a very happy marriage, but she's a very progressive woman. And so I work really hard. I read Huffington Post. It's my job. I try to read across stuff, but still, when we're doing news reports for the day and she's telling me what she's read from how she gets her information and what's been highlighted, it is every single morning and every single night, it's a different world. She's got her sort of, boy, I'm really upset today reading about X. And it's a very different world than a Republican news source. And all of that locks us into place. I respect President Biden. I respect his call for civility. But one other incredible number. You're a first lady, Melania Trump. Melania Trump had a 44 negative in the first month from Democrats. Dr. Biden, 55% negative with Republicans on her positive negative scale. She's not a controversial figure, and she has a 55 negative. If the first lady has a 55 negative to start an administration, that's all you need to know about how partisan this country has become. And so, despite the regard for President Biden's efforts and attempts, I don't think that that's going to change anytime soon. And then I have one more depressing thing to say. My other depressing thing to say is I used to say it would take a 9/11 or some national emergency to really try to pull this country together. We're in the midst of a 100-year pandemic. And in that 100-year pandemic, by day 60, what I said to my client, NBC Wall Street Journal, was, oh my God, we're in day 60. And this has already become a partisan issue. Within 60 days, Democrats, believed X, Republicans believed Y, and they were totally different. And the gap between how Republican and Democrats feel about the coronavirus, its relative threat, it is, to me, extraordinary. We're all mammals. We're all human. I saw no reason when this first started why this would within 2 months become a highly charged partisan issue. So my point being, my mantra, which is, well, a national emergency might pull this country together, at least for the first attempt at that model, the pandemic, that was a total abject failure. And incredibly quickly, it became another red and blue issue.
Well, let's move on from that depressing topic, which it is for sure. And this has been terrific, Bill. You're sharing your wisdom with us. Let's go to political campaign to wrap up. And that is, what do you enjoy most about working on a political campaign?
Well, first, I'm trying to be humble or not go overboard here, but let me just talk about the personalities. People who work in campaigns are not always deep thinkers, but they get stuff done. There is an energy, there's a pace, and there's quick decision making, and there's sort of a level of action that's really pretty cool and pretty addictive. Also, number two, emotionally, it's a shared. It's like actors. It's like a shared family. I mean, so when you first do your first campaigns and you're like all cranked up at midnight, well, you can't talk to normal people. The only people who are still up are the other people in the campaign at midnight. You talk to each other, and there's like a bond that is so much more powerful than normal life. And then three, look, I do this work because I'm an American exceptionalism. I believe in America, and I believe what I'm doing contributes to the public good overall. That's how I feel, and I think my clients and what we do and what my difference my clients make is really, really important. And so I feel engaged because I feel like, in John McCain's words, I am doing something bigger than myself. But then number four, there's nothing better than winning. And in terms of, again, normal life versus campaign life, in normal life, you don't have a day where the world tells you every 2 years whether you won or lost. And sure, it's crushing when people you really care about lose, but the high that you get when you win is difficult to replace. And so you put all that together, and that's why I'm a lifetime junkie and political junkie and never going to move off. That just, you don't find those things in normal life. You find those things among a set of people the famous Henry IV band of brothers. And now we'll say band of brothers and sisters. And so people are also surprised because a lot of my friends are Democrats, but they're Democrats who do what I do for a living. It's the same personality. They're just they're on a different side. And the other thing about our country is you have to believe that you have to believe in this process, which is I believe in America's general goodness. I love, there's a Winston Churchill quote, Americans will always do the right thing when they've exhausted all other options. And I think the process that our country goes through to resolve and to come to conclusion, this country has a capacity for change and peaceful change that is not like anything in the history of the world. And this country's capacity for positive change is a wonder. It's something that is powerful, and I believe in our capacity for change. And I think that the dialogue that my clients create around that has incredible good to come to public consensus in a way that allows us to change as a country. And again, our country was rightfully proud electing a Black American to president. What other country's done that in terms of how quickly attitudes have changed? This issue about gay marriage. You don't change major cultural stuff in 12 years. This is America. We change, and we change peacefully. That's a powerful part of a process that I am a small part of that I think provides meaning to what I do and something I enjoy.
Bill, we're going to wrap up here. That's just a terrific sentiment to wrap up on. So we appreciate your time today and appreciate your wisdom, and we'd love to have you back at another point in the future.
Well, you're kind to do that, and thank you for inviting me, and thank you for your patience with my long answers. If I'm on with Chuck Todd, he gives me this stare of death, meaning, Bill, we're on friggin' TV, wrap it up, wrap it up, wrap it up. You can't talk that long. So thank you for the free form here on your show, where I got to do a little more Bill-like chit chat and give a little longer answer. So thank you, Gary.